All right, everyone, we are back. It's been a little bit since I've posted content as well. I've been taking care of stuff, just taking care of life. And so I have been working on OPR stuff, specifically custom armies that we're going to get into. I haven't had my home setup available to me. So I have been taking care of some things and working on some things that I'll be posting. But it's just good to be back. And so I would say this. I want to talk about something that's very close to my heart, and I think it's very important to me when I talk about one-page rules. And that is, I want to talk about why I feel custom armies are just very important to the future of one-page rules. And I'm specifically, as this is called Competitive Corner, I'm talking about this from a competitive perspective. You know, I want to look at sort of the long-term future of competitive play in one-page rules here. So there's a lot to get into here, but while we're doing that, hey, like, subscribe, and comment here. It's something that's going to help the channel grow. I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers. That would really help the channel, just open up some opportunities for YouTube to give me some support. So if you haven't subscribed yet, definitely subscribe. For those who have subscribed and watched videos, really appreciate it here today. So I want to talk about what's going on here. So one, there's a few points I want to hit in here about why I feel custom armies are so important. So, one, there has obviously been a lot of, I want to talk about custom armies in specifically because this is something that I've seen in the competitive community, which is sort of divided. Some people think we should have custom armies for competitive play. Some people, disagree with that and want to use the official army. So I want to sort of take some time to clarify my points and why I feel that I think custom armies are very important to the future of OPR's competitive play. And I do want to talk about that. I'm talking about the future. Obviously speaking, I'm trying to think more forward thinking. I see a bright future for OPR, and actually I see a bright future for OPR's competitive play. I think it's such a good game, and there's so much OPR has going for it that I can't help but see this game grow into a very awesome competitive experience while also being casual, right? I love playing casual games, but like I said, if you're here, you're watching this video, I'm talking about generally competitive play. So the first thing I want to get into is 5 points. One, I want to talk about, unlike a lot of game systems, how it's so easy to create and update custom armies. The other thing that I think is so important when we talk about competitive play is there's an opportunity for competitive players to really control the meta, if you will, or the armies. I think it's so important. Another thing I want to talk about is similar is how we can constantly, based on what the OPR has already given us. They've given us these tools that we can constantly update and balance these armies through play testing. I think for me, a big thing that I think is ancillary, but also very important to the growth of OPR, I want to talk about why bringing in 40K players into the game. A lot of 40K players really do love playing it competitively, and I think it's an opportunity for us to sort of reach out to them and show them that OPR isn't just a beer and pretzels game. While it can be, it's actually a really tight, very fun game, and a game that I feel can really help be grown through, bringing in 40K players. The other thing I want to end is sort of a contrasting point, but I think is another point is that custom armies allow us to play to OPR strength. What I think OPR strength really is creativity. One of the things I love about OPR so much is sort of this sandbox quality that they talk about in the lore and the armies, and I think having custom armies allows us to play to that creativity here. So let's get into it. I want to talk about, first of all, the idea about custom armies. I haven't seen any system where they're so easy to create and update custom armies. One, we get, OPR has already done so much work that I can't help but want to leverage that work. We have a sort of this constant point system across all armies. That's huge. The other thing I think that, there are other games that have sort of point system and custom army builders, but none of them that I've seen that has a UI and an army builder that's so easy to use. And that's a really big deal. The other thing I think is that this UI is also very accessible. OPR has done so much great work. I, as a person who's a competitive player, feel that we should leverage that work. I don't, I think this is also sort of the future, which we'll get into about OPR. But one, custom armies, I think in OPR, unlike any other game system, this point system, this army builder that has a great UI, and the fact that these armies are accessible to all players. It's all free, right? You have to obviously pay a tier 1 Patreon to create the armies, but the armies are all available to all players. Once you publish those armies, it's all free. That's awesome. Those three things, one, is just something to really consider about custom armies. The next thing I think is very important when we talk about the future of one-page rules, it's something that I don't see any other game providing, which is that competitive players can now control their own meta, their own system. I think that's vital to the importance of OPR's future in a competitive sense. Competitive players, I am a person, I believe that the competitive armies and the competitive meta should be left to competitive players. One, because competitive players care enough. They care a lot about it. And it's going to take a lot of care and a lot of work. To balance armies, it's going to take a lot of playtesting. It's going to take a lot of tweaks. And all that, for me, my perspective, that should come from players who, one, care to put in the work, and two, are actually good enough to make informed decisions. I'm not against the official armies, but I do follow the creator of OPR and some of his talks, and he openly admits he's not a competitive player, and I don't. My view is that to really have a balanced game as much as possible, you have to have a passion for it, and I'm perfectly okay. If you're not a competitive player, no big deal. But if you are a competitive player, I think that you want the armies in a competitive play to be put in ways that are meant for people who are going to really put in the work for. One as well is that it adds varieties to armies, so that this is something that I try to do in my own custom armies, is that we want all the models to have a place. We don't want just one or two units to be the good ones, and this happens a lot in other systems where army lists are really, from a competitive sense, just cut down to 2 or 3 units, and then there's sort of a whole bunch of throwaway units. Custom armies allow us to actually make all the units in an army viable through different purposes. That adds variety. It means that you go to a tournament, you're not just facing, and I've played a lot of different competitive games competitively, and we've seen it over and over. You go to a tournament, you hear the faction's name, you can basically quote what that faction is bringing. And the idea to me that we can now have variety of army list builds within the faction is just so huge. One thing I want to talk about as well, it's getting into the similar. We have this UI, and the way the system works is with patch notes, we can constantly update and balance these armies. One thing that I think I don't want to rely on the official armies in a competitive sense is because it's going to take a lot of play testing to balance these armies, and that is something that we have, and we have a UI, we have a point system to be able to do that. How that playtesting comes about is really up to the community. One thing, I go back to it as well. I don't want to rely on an outside source, outside of the competitive community, to sort of constantly tweak and update these armies, right? And I say this, when I mean the competitive community, I don't just mean myself. I mean all of us, right? I, throughout my channel, have brought on a lot of people, and a lot of people are passionate about competitive play. I want us as a community of competitive players to, in the future, get together and bring about some sort of system that we can do, and not rely on an outside source who may or may not make the decisions that need to be made. I think another thing that I would love to see is eventually, don't get me wrong, eventually I would love to see some sort of unified army list system of scenarios, but I think we're too early in that. For me, I would love for now to see sort of local competitive metas be developed and tested. I would love to see maybe local groups have their own versions of custom armies, and that those armies are then tested. And then we as the community can kind of come together and say, well, this is too powerful, this is too weak, and this is here. That gives us an opportunity. Those local metas allow us an opportunity to try different things in scenarios and armies and in games to say, okay, this is really where we see it going. And the idea that as the game continues to grow and develop, that we are constantly able to update and balance those armies. This is another thing, an ancillary point that I think is very important. Now, OPR, I've talked to people, and I've found that OPR players tend to fall, broadly speaking, into two different categories. One, there are people who sort of look at 40K players and they say, oh, we don't want 40K players to come into our game. I fall on the opposite end of the spectrum. I think that OPR should be an alternative to 40K players from a competitive sense. It's such a great game. And one thing that I think that custom armies can really do is make models in 40K really good. A great example for me is the Terminators in 40K. I'm one of these people that I think that we have to think of this contextually. There's a lot of 40K players who have Terminators with Power Fist and Stormbolters. How can we make that model, which is sort of very much suffering from a hybrid tax in 40K, in OPR, can we make that model more efficient with some different loadouts? Can we allow a person to maybe do a little bit of kit bashing where they can replace some weapons on that Terminator to make it very competitive and very good in 40K? That is a big thing for me. I want people to be able to take their existing 40K armies and to port those into competitive play at OPR with little changes, maybe some kit bashing, maybe a little changes on weapons, so that those armies are actually very viable and very competitive. I think about things like Terminators for Battle Brothers, also things like the Tau as well. One thing, we can show 40K players that OPR is not this beer and pretzels game. It is actually a very tight competitive game that I think can truly bring out there. Another thing is that we give an opportunity to provide some real uniqueness in armies. I've specifically been working on a lot of the Battle Brothers factions. I'm going to be posting those in the future. But I think the 40K armies of Battle Brothers have a lot more uniqueness that custom armies for OPR can really allow each of those Battle Brother armies to sort of come out and be a lot more unique. I have heard of criticism of OPR that all the armies sort of feel the same. Through custom armies, that doesn't have to be a criticism anymore. We really can take all these armies and we can make them a lot more unique, play their own way. And I think that is something that isn't like, that doesn't have to be a criticism for OPR. We can make these armies a lot more unique. The one thing I want to talk about lastly is custom armies allow for us to play to OPR strength of creativity. Creativity and the ability of 3D printing and using your own models. This is something that I'm going to talk about when I work on the Human Defense Force. We don't have to use the loadouts of weapons and the units that are sort of like, I think it is great that OPR does have, does effectively support existing GW armies in some manner. But I think that OPR can go beyond that. We can have armies that can take on a life of their own. We can have new units in these armies that really are different than 40K's equivalents as well. It allows, while supporting Games Workshop's versions of the armies, we can also sort of break out of those GW equivalents and make these armies very unique to OPR. This is also going to provide more uniqueness in the armies. I'm a big proponent of that. I do slightly agree that I think the OPR's armies are they're a little samey, but I don't think that I think with custom armies we really can provide balance. We can provide engaging competitive play. We can provide variety in armies, and we can make these armies unique. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Short video today. But I'd love to get feedback on this. This is just me sort of giving some points that I'd like to sort of bring this to the competitive community. Like, subscribe, and comment as well. I'm going to be having a lot of my custom armies come out. Like I said, although I've been away from my setup, I have been working, and I'll be posting a lot of really interesting things. Hey, if you got some army lists and custom armies, would love to see them as well. Thanks a lot.